Greetings everybody, it is I, obviously Jesus, here with the second Patreon video for the month of August 2017. Originally this video was supposed to be about the flaws of libertarianism. I apologize, but that video is not going to get made today. It's going to get made next week as part of the videos I'm making for my my postponed vacation. I'm going on vacation later this month. It was supposed to be last month, but it got postponed, so that kind of sucks, but I'll send you all nudes from the beach, of course. But anyway, I'm obviously Jesus, and I'm here today to talk about a request that I received from Superhands, who asked me to talk about the ethics of testing stuff on animals. And you know, I didn't really have a good answer for this video for a very long time. I didn't have I wasn't going to make it originally because I didn't really have a concrete set of opinions, because I was so personally divided on the subject, because I can definitely see both sides, and we'll talk about that as we start the video. But this is a video I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to make properly because of my own personal hang-ups about it. So I think this provides an interesting opportunity for me to talk about something that I was, up until pretty recently, when I had a kind of epiphaniac moment about it, I was pretty conflicted about it. So I think being able to talk about this is pretty good, and I want to do it while it's fresh in my mind. So again, the video about the flaws of libertarianism has been pushed to next week. I'll be making it as part of a series of 3 videos that I'm going to be publishing whilst I am away. But anyway, I'm obviously Jesus. Let's talk about testing stuff on animals. Now, for those of you who don't know, this video is probably going to be, you know, it's probably going to make more sense if you watch it after you watch the video where I talk about the reasons for me being a vegan. So if you haven't seen that video, I think it was part of the first month that I started doing the Patreon, which I believe was June. If you want to go back and look through the Patreon history, you have access to all the previous videos I've made, not just the ones that came after your subscription. So if you want to go back and look at the archives and listen to that veganism video first, I would definitely encourage that, because it's going to inform my opinions here as well. So it probably will make this video make a little bit more sense to you if you have that previous knowledge, because I'm not going to, you know, go over in great detail, at least, all the reasons that I believe exploitation of animals is either detrimental to us, or bad, or unethical, or what have you, however you want to put it. But basically, you should realize that this video is being made by somebody who doesn't eat animals, wear animals, or otherwise exploit the suffering of animals in any way. So without further ado, let's get into the main meat of the video, which is testing on animals. Is it okay ever? I mean, I think that, you know, there's a lot of different things that animals are tested for. A lot of the times you see cosmetics, you see a lot of people getting very angry, and I believe rightly so, over the fact that animals are very often tested on for cosmetic purposes. And let's get this right out of the way. I don't want to make this video about really the ethics of testing on animals for cosmetics, because I believe, you know, flat out, that there is no aesthetical excuse for bringing pain and suffering potentially on another creature, keeping them in captivity and using them for basically literally often as lab rats for, you know, your aesthetical purposes, so your hair can be silkier, so you can, you know, wax your taint 5% quicker. I mean, I don't honestly know. I want to spend this video rather talking about that, because that is obviously, I think most people have come around. I don't think it's a wild opinion to say that testing on animals is pretty bad for, you know, just aesthetical purposes. Testing cosmetic products on them is completely unnecessary. And again, just to harken back to my video on veganism, if a more powerful species came to this planet and decided that they wanted to enslave us and take our, make our reproductive decisions for us, use us in labs as experiments for their cosmetic products, we wouldn't like that. We wouldn't submit to that. There would be an armed resistance. So I think that if you use products that are tested on animals for cosmetic purposes, that you're basically saying that you're just taking advantage of the fact that the animals that are being tested on can't fight back. You're literally, by definition, categorically taking advantage of a helpless creature, and you're benefiting from their suffering directly. And really, there's no two sides to that issue. I think that, if you wouldn't want it done to you, then why are you doing it to another creature? Why are you purchasing products and funneling money to corporations that perpetrate these things on other species that simply can't fight back or simply don't have a voice to vocalize their displeasure? It's literally the most arrogant, stupid, service level, moronic, speciesist garbage that exists, I think. But that's not what we're going to talk about in this video. We want to explore the idea of whether or not there is ever an ethical way or an ethical situation to test on animals. So, I mean, this is something where, I find it quite hard. And it took me, like I said, a pretty long time of thinking to really come to the point where I felt comfortable making a video about this, honestly, because it is a very delicate issue. Because when you talk about animal testing for non-cosmetic purposes, you're usually looking at, and for the purposes of this video, we're going to be looking at the idea of medications. Animals are used to test medications to, you'll hear it often on news sites. You'll see that there's been, promising developments in cures for horrible diseases like, they're from everything from, cancer to Parkinson's to Alzheimer's to things like that. And, the reason we hear about these advances in, all those terrible diseases in the areas of those diseases is because people are testing on animals in labs, usually on rats, I believe, because their brains work in a similar enough fashion to humans where you can sort of extrapolate from testing on rats to testing on humans. And that's where it gets a bit dicey because, I'm a vegan. I already went over this. I've made a whole video on it. But if I were in the woods with, just myself, or if I had a family or something especially, but if I were just alone in the woods and I got attacked by a bear and, that bear was, to my knowledge, attempting to murder me and have me for its dinner. If I had any kind of weapon, be it a gun or a stick or a metal pipe or something, I would defend myself against that bear. It's not vegan to kill an animal, but when it comes down to a life or death situation, then you have to acknowledge that you're not just going to sit back there. I don't think any vegan, or maybe there are some, I don't know, I don't want to make blanket statements, but I don't think most vegans would sit back and just let themselves be mauled by some kind of animal, even if it were endangered, even if it were, just an innocent thing, just acting out its natural impulses. I still don't think most vegans would sit back and literally have the presence of mind to let themselves be mauled as part of the natural order. I don't think that's true. It's certainly not true of me, and I can most definitively speak to my own opinions and experiences. I will not let myself be mauled by a bear in the woods, even though it's not a very good vegan thing of me to try to, harm or kill that bear to save my own life. I'm not going to let myself be mauled by a wild animal, basically. I'm not going to let someone I care about be mauled by a wild animal, even though I am a vegan. So, knowing that, that creates an interesting little pocket of gray area where there are situations where it's understandable that someone who identifies as a vegan can harm animals. So it creates that pocket of gray area, and that's what we have to explore when it comes to testing on animals. Because testing on animals is, in a more indirect sense, basically the same thing in a way. Because let's say you have a child with cancer, probably one of the worst situations as a parent you can be in. Let's say you have a child with cancer, and let's say that there's a drug that's being tested that could help your child with cancer and children with cancer all across the world, but you know, that drug might be extremely dangerous for human beings to try. So, I mean, can you really justify testing that drug on another human being when it might bring them some kind of irreparable harm? I don't know how analogous this is to real life drug testing experiences. I don't know if there's potential cures or treatments for diseases that can genuinely just, you know, you take a pill and you get completely fucked up. But let's take this idea to its logical extremes. Let's construct this situation and imagine that you're in this situation, you have this kid with cancer, there's this drug out there that could help them and all other kids with cancer, and you know, the drug is too dangerous potentially for human beings to try without any kind of without any knowledge of how it might affect them. And how do we get the knowledge of how it might affect humans? Like I said earlier, generally that comes from testing on animals, specifically rats. So if your child is going to die, and children all over the world are dying, are you going to say that a chance to improve or potentially save your child's life, much less the lives of many other children worldwide, is worth more than the life of a rat? Because it's not like a life and death situation in the sense that somebody's going to die right then and there, like, you know, if I were being mauled by a bear. But it is, in a sense, a life and death situation where somebody's going to die, eventually in a, you know, a premature way, I think is fair to say, when it comes to childhood cancer. I think it's fair to say that somebody is going to die, so it in and of itself constitutes a life and death situation. Now, is it okay to foist that responsibility on another species? If the drug in this hypothetical situation could cause grievous harm to a human being testing it, then can you really say that you should test that on a rat? I mean, I think if I were a parent, that I wouldn't care at any point. I wouldn't care if it were another human being. I wouldn't care if it were a rat that were testing this drug, because I would want, above all else, to save the life of my child, who in this hypothetical has cancer. So I think that has to be that little pocket of gray area for the this purposes of testing on animals. Obviously, the first thing you want to do when you're testing a drug is you want to have it tested on humans. If it's at all possible, if you want to test your product, then you should at least examine, to the best of your ability, whether or not that drug is going to be safe for human, you know, testing. And this goes for cosmetics, and this goes for medicines and things that could help people who are in real trouble, apart from, you know, split ends in their hair. So I think, first and foremost, with any product, you need to examine whether or not your product can be tested on humans. If it's a cosmetic product and it can't be tested on humans because it's going to make their hair fall out, you know, too bad. I don't think that you have the right to go and test on animals. I don't think that you have the right to pass that burden to an innocent creature. I just don't. I don't think that you have the right to exploit the life of another living being who can't fight back or vocalize their displeasure simply because you want, you know, this, you know, improved aesthetic to people's lives, simply because you want to make money off your hair product or your whatever. But when it comes to saving people's lives, when it comes to saving the lives of creatures, I can say that, you know, it's hard for me. It's extremely hard, and I think personally I can't really do it. I can't say that I condemn people who would use the benefits of animal testing when it comes to medication that can save lives or vastly improve lives, because I believe they do test on rats when it comes to psychological medication as well. If my child had Down syndrome, if my child had some kind of I don't know. I don't know what kind of diseases are most common in children, but if my child's life were being crippled or being threatened by some kind of disorder or disease, I would do anything, I think, to help that child. And so if there were a human being who was hoarding but if there were a human being like, you know, Martin Shkreli, who were hoarding the cure for a disease that my child had, I would kill another human being to save my child. I would do that. So how can I say that I wouldn't use the benefits of animal testing to save the life of my child, which I think is a Paul Simon song. Now I have that song running through my fucking head as I'm sitting here. But again, I think it's hard to condemn people who test on animals for the purposes of, you know, greatly improving or saving the lives of innocent people who are subject to a disease. And I've been using the example of a child because it's probably the worst thing you can imagine for a child to have cancer or something. But I think the same principle goes for people who are of any age, really, because you can't, you know, just disqualify people on their age. Because if you care about somebody, you would do anything to save them. You would harm another human being. You would harm, so how can you say that you're not going to harm or benefit from the harm of another species? It's that sort of life or death adrenaline type of thing. And I think that people who test cures or potential cures for Alzheimer's, cancer, etc., and these debilitating and often life-threatening diseases on animals are simply carrying out the will of any sensible person who would do anything, literally anything, any kind of harm, any kind of, you know, danger that they would take upon themselves or put upon another person or animal to save that person they care for. So I think that in sum, that while it's never morally great to test on animals, I don't think that I can personally condemn people who test on animals for the express purpose of relieving people from life-threatening or debilitating diseases. I think that's the one situation where we can all sort of come together to understand that just because it's not a bear threatening your family in the woods, threatening to maul and, you know, decapitate and eat them, I think we can all agree that we would do anything to any person or being to save the lives of the people we care for. And I don't think that we can condemn people who act in accordance with that. Obviously, I would be 100% in favor of banning animal testing for cosmetic purposes. I would be in favor of jailing people who, put animals in captivity and subject them to all sorts of things on their fur, on their skin, just to see what happens, just so they can figure out whether or not they're going to make a buck on their, cosmetic product in the stores. But can you really condemn someone for doing whatever it takes to save a life or relieve someone from one of the most horrible, debilitating diseases that exists? I don't think we can. I've thought about this a lot. I truly think that it just comes down to, if you can sympathize with a person for if you can sympathize and imagine a situation where you would harm another person or being to save someone you care about, I don't think that can be condemned, because we all have that breaking point. We all have the point where all our, high-minded ethics go out the window, and it's life or death, you against whatever's threatening you or someone you genuinely love and care about. And I think that people who do that and act in accordance with the will of people who want to see their families relieved from these diseases and whatnot, I don't think we can condemn them for testing on humans or animals, consensually, of course, when it comes to humans. But I would do anything to save somebody that I loved with debilitating disease. And in some, I don't think that we can condemn people for that. When it comes to, it's hard to draw a hard line, though. I will admit that. It's hard to draw a line of just where the truly debilitating diseases start. Obviously, with things like Alzheimer's or cancer, it's pretty cut and dry. But can we test on animals then for like mental disorders? Can we test a cure or a treatment for autism? Is autism really that bad? I mean, I've been diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which no longer technically exists when I was like 13. It no longer exists in the DSM, of course. It still exists as a set of categories. They just call it something else. But anyway, I digress. Can you really justify treating or testing on animals to treat someone with Asperger's syndrome? That's a much harder question than, talking about someone with cancer. And personally, I'd say no. I'd say you'd have to come up with a set of criteria for, whether or not you can test on animals for the purposes of treating a disease, if it's debilitating or not. Because personally, I don't find Asperger's syndrome, if I even have it, I think I'm probably more socially adept than most people with Asperger's syndrome. There's people out there who don't understand, turn taking in conversations and whatnot, and I understand that. So I don't know if I can justify testing on animals to treat somebody with a high-functioning disorder like that. And this is where the gray area reappears, because I don't know if you can, it's hard for me to say that, oh no, you can't test on Asperger's people because it's not that bad. But I mean, there's people and there's parents out there of children with this disorder that would definitely say it is bad, that it's inhibiting their child, and they see him growing up with no friends and struggling to create social connections and whatnot, and that probably pains them. They would probably do anything to help their child be more normal if there were some hypothetical cure or treatment that would help that child greatly get over these social anxieties. So it's hard to put an objective value on that. It's really not something that I'm prepared to do personally, but I will say that in a general sense, if you're in a situation where you do anything to save somebody, then I think testing on animals has to be on the table. But anyway, I've said what I'm probably going to say about a billion times now. I don't want to keep repeating myself. And I know it's kind of hard to grasp what I'm truly saying because it's not cut and dry and black and white. It's very difficult to, really define where that line is that makes something so debilitating. But all I know is I can sympathize with people who would, attack any man or beast if it would save the lives of somebody they cared about. And I think that if you're in a situation where you can sympathize with that, then you can't take animals off the table any more than you can take human trials off the table in the end. So I'm obviously Jesus. Hope I've given you some food for thought. We'll be back next week with another video on the flaws of libertarianism and some more videos after that while I'm off in, Africa on nude beaches waving my very pale dick around or whatever you want to imagine I'm doing on vacation. But yeah, I'm obviously Jesus. Thank you to all my Patreon people who continually make this possible. I will see you next Sunday. Deuces. God, this is terrible.